This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Saturday. That means it's time for Nitsa Notes, my weekly vlog series about limited magic. We're talking about some early impressions about Bloomburrow. Right now, we don't have enough 17 lands data to come away with like really strong conclusions about individual cards, but I've played the format enough that I have some early takeaways about how I think the format has shaken out. So the first thing I want to mention in this, I guess I have six early takeaways. The first of these is that synergy is really important, and that's been true in a lot of sets lately. But this format has a bunch of cards that are monocolored, even at lower rarities at like common, that are effectively multicolored. And what I mean by that is there are lots of cards in this set that aren't just like generally good. I mean, we have those, you know, there's Banishing Light, for example. But there are a lot of cards in this set that need to be in the right deck for them to be good. And they can be unplayable in the wrong deck. One of the best examples of this is probably Cash Grab, a card that doesn't work that well outside of the Squirrel deck. You need to be getting the food out of it for it to perform really, really well, which it does. But if you're not a deck that can make food with it consistently, it becomes a lot worse. It's green-black is the only color pair that's green that cares about the graveyard, right? So that creates this weird sort of tension in the format where it's like, should I take this card early because it has a really high ceiling? Or should I see if it wheels, and if it does, take it then because nobody's going to want it but the Squirrel deck? And I think for the most part, the answer in those situations is the second one, where I wouldn't take it really early, you know, just like you do in any format where you have to think about, like, when it comes to your first few picks especially, what is the probability that I play this card, like, depending on how the draft goes? And, you know, multicolored cards have a lower probability because you have to end up in those two colors or at least get enough fixing to splash it. So those have a lower probability of making your deck. So you have to include that in your evaluation of the cards. And you have to do that in this format with cards like Cash Grab. Scales of Shale is another one of those where, like, if you're in the Lizard deck, that card is bonkers. If you're not, it's not very good. So this creates an interesting draft environment where we have what are effectively lots of multicolored commons, where you have to make those sorts of decisions that where, like, this might be the best card in my... It's either going to be one of the better cards in my deck, especially a common, or it's going to be unplayable. So it is... I think that is sort of punishing, especially for newer players who just want to be like, okay, this card is good, I'm going to take it. Because if you don't take advantage of these synergistic commons, you're going to end up with a weaker deck. If you're just taking cards that are good in every deck, and only taking those, you do end up with a weaker deck. So you need to be ready to take these synergy pieces that have really high ceilings and horrible floors. So the next point, the next early takeaway I have is, this format is fast. Decks like Red White and Red Black can go 1, 2, 3, 4 and just kill you. Like, that happens in this format. There's lots of good 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops, 4-drops, even at lower rarities. And there are draws that you just can't beat where those decks just do the thing. So that is something to keep in mind. But, and it's a big but, there are grindier decks in the format that do have the tools to survive, especially if the opponent doesn't get the nut draw. Like the Squirrel deck, the black-green deck, I think is one of the better decks in the format. I don't quite think it's the best deck. I'll talk about what I do think is the best deck in a moment. But it's really good. It might be the second or third best deck. And it is a slower deck, doing stuff with Cash Grab like we talked about earlier. And its access to food is a big part of what allows it to survive to the later game to generate value out of the graveyard. So I guess I would say that, like, really aggressive, you know, green-white is another one that can just curve out and kill you. These sorts of decks are great, but they can be beat, and they're not always going to get their insane draws where you just can't do anything. But it does kind of stink, too, that they gave these decks really good tricks, like Scales of Shale, like I already mentioned, and the black-red deck is just... I mean, I don't want to say it's unbeatable. It's a common and it's a combat trick, but if you're trying to just like play a removal spell on their best creature and they can pay 1 for Scales of Shale, or if you try to block their creature and trade with it and they just play Scales of Shale, like all of those things are backbreaking. You have Overprotect too in green. So there's lots of good tricks in the format that can make it even more frustrating, even when they don't have the nut draw, but they do need to have their best draws to kill decks like black-green before they can start to get back in the game, which is a very real thing you can do. So I would say it's a fast format, but it's also one where slower decks have a chance. You know, it's not like you can't play them like in some formats. So another early takeaway, I think white is the best color, and that's just because the quality of its commons and uncommons is really high. Some of this I predicted in the set review. Intrepid Rabbit is insane, which was pretty easy to see. You know, they gave it Offspring for 1 generic, and the 3 mana 3/2 it is up front is like a playable card. And then when you Offspring it, you get 2 triggers. If you got Valiant, you're triggering Valiant on multiple things. Even if you're not triggering Valiant on multiple things, you just got 2 bodies that can help you attack better. Like, that card is crazy. One that I didn't predict was going to be as good as it is Carrot Cake. You know, I liked it in the set review okay, and I said, you know, paying 4 mana to gain 3 life and make 2/1/1s and scry 2 is pretty good, but I thought it would be a little too slow to be something that you always wanted, but it hasn't really panned out that way. It's just like an okay, like as a 2-drop, it's pretty good. It helps set up your next draw. It gives you a decent body, a body with a relevant creature type, a body that's a token, which the green-white deck really cares about. And then later in the game, you can cash it in for more value and improve your draws. Like, it just does a lot of little things, and even though the total investment is often 4 mana, although sometimes if you can forage with it is when it gets really nuts. If you're in green-white and you play a card with forage, that's where it's like really nuts, really powerful, because you don't pay the extra 2. You don't get into life either, but you get some effect, and that's generally better since you're not paying any additional mana, and you end up getting 2 2/2s and all of this for 2 mana with the scries and everything. That's where it feels really busted, but it even feels fine playing it the normal way, where you spend 4 total mana and get all these little effects. And that card has been really good. Like, those are 2 really good commons. You know, we don't really have enough data on 17 lands right now to very strongly say that these are like 2 of the best commons in the set, but it feels like they are so far, and the data, the early returns on the 17 lands data we have do support the fact that these 2 are really good. And then you also have Harvest Right Host, which just happens to combo super well with these 2 cards. And that is something, that one I also predicted in the set review, although maybe it's a little better than I expected, because there are just a lot of cards at common and uncommon that give you multiple rabbit bodies, and once you're drawing cards with Harvest Right Host, your 3 mana 3/3 that's buffing your other stuff, again, potentially triggering Valiant. Once you're drawing cards with that, which you can do with commons in this set, your opponent has a very, very hard time winning. So that's like the core of these green-white decks, or white decks more broadly, that has felt really absurd. No matter really what white deck you're in, if you're in red-white, this works out well. If you're in green-white, it works out well. If you're in black-white, you do the same thing. Like, these cards are just good in all the decks. And that's an important thing, because there are a lot of cards in the set that aren't. And on a related note, which I think I've already hinted at, so far green-white feels like the best deck. Like, right now, if I had to do a ranking, it would go green-white, black-red, black-green. That would be how I see the format right now. Those are the best decks. You know, that is, the green-white deck can curve out in such a nasty way when it makes tokens on turn 2, where you play, you know, the 1 mana 1/2 that attacks as a 3/2 if you have a token. Then you play like Carrot Cake on turn 2. Then on turn 3, you play the 2/3 that's a 4/3 Trampler when you have a token in play. And you just, you know, those curve outs are disgusting, especially when supported by powerful combat tricks and like value cards like Harvest Right Host. And this deck is the best for Harvest Right Host and Carrot Cake. So it can really leverage those cards that are already good into a bunch of value, because it wants to be making multiple rabbit bodies. You know, I didn't even mention the 5 mana 3/2 that makes 2/1/1s in my list of all these really good green-white things. You know, and when you have that at the top of your curve and you have Harvest Right Host in play, the game's just over. So yeah, I mean, green-white is really good. It has these curve outs that are unbeatable, and I think black-red has them as well. But I think green-white is even more potent, and it's not that hard to trigger these. If you have a token, this creature is incredibly good for how much it costs. Like, it just happens. And the flip side of that is blue-red feels bad. This doesn't surprise me that much. In the set review, I gave the Signpost Uncommon a C. that is a rough grade for a Signpost Uncommon. Like, they tend to be C plus or better, which means like you feel good about having them in your deck, and a lot of them are B minus and up, which means they pull you into the color pair. But that just wasn't true about the blue-red Signpost, which is this 2-mana 1/1 prowess that decreases the cost of spells. Like, it's definitely more for constructed. Also has haste. It's definitely more for constructed than it is for limited, and I think that really shows. And I gave the hybrid common a C minus because just starting out as a 3-mana 2/2 these days is so bad. And there's just not enough good support for casting spells. In a format where every other deck is doing big synergy things, blue-red, and if you try to force the synergy, it doesn't come out that well. You need some rares and mythics to really end up in a spot where it does work. So it's not like unplayable, but it is the roughest deck in the format as far as I can tell so far. Like, blue-red is rough, which is a little sad for the Otters, but it's early, and maybe I'm wrong, but that is how it feels right now. And the last 2 points I have are sort of about lands in the format. The first of these is that the village cycle is legit. Some of them are better than I thought. They've played, like, when I've played with them, I've been like, wow, this is really good. The black one and the white one, especially, are quite good. And the downside on these doesn't come up all that much. I mean, it does come up sometimes, but they don't hurt your mana base. The bonus they give you, whether it's the white one, which lets you dig through the top several cards of your library and grab a creature with the right type. The bonus that they give you where they turn into a real card late is more than worth the downside of sometimes you can't play your removal spell because you have, this card in your deck, and you don't have the right color mana for things that aren't creatures. It happens sometimes, but it's worth the downside because lands turning into real cards late, and that's the most true about the black and white one. They both just become real cards late, like full stop. Like, they never don't do the thing late for the most part. I mean, I'm sure you can whiff. I haven't yet with the white one. The other ones are good too, but they give you more like little incremental value things that aren't quite worth a full card until you reach a certain point, right? Whereas these two, just upfront, activate them, you get a full card at some point. And those two have been great, but they've all been good. They have all, I think, overperformed based on where I thought they would be overall. And the last thing is that this format is very strictly 2 colors. And you can splash. I've tried it. I've kind of succeeded at it. I've also failed at it. But there's just not enough fixing in the set. And this is how it looked going into the set. Like, you don't have a cycle of dual lands. We get this village cycle instead, which inherently decreases your ability to splash things for the most part, especially if it's a non-creature spell. So you want to be playing villages. That hurts your mana base, makes splashing harder. You can occasionally make it happen because you might have, there is the land where you name a type, name a color or mana type, whatever it is. You name the thing, and then you get mana of that color when you tap it. Then there's also the Surveil 1 land. Like, you've got lands that can fix, but they're just not that good at it overall. One enters tapped, one's a filter land. And furthermore, there just aren't that many reasons to splash. Like, you stay 2 colors in this format, and your mana base is going to be pretty good, and you're going to be able to cast all of your spells reasonably well. But there aren't like a bunch of 3-color cards. There are a few. There aren't a bunch of 2-color cards even in this set. You've pretty much got, at lower rarities, all you have is your Signpost Uncommon, and then you have the hybrid ones, which are sort of 2 colors, but sort of not. So don't try to splash. I mean, if I was going to say broadly how you should approach drafting this format, don't prioritize fixing that highly like we do in many formats of recent times. And don't prioritize like multicolored cards that are like outside of your main 2 colors as much as you might in other formats, because it's just tough to make it work consistently. So those are my 6 takeaways. To recap, synergy is really important. There are lots of cards that are like either great or awful, which there's some good things about that and some bad things about that in Limited, I think. The format is fast, and the fastest decks kind of have the upper hand over the first few turns, but slower decks like black-green can stabilize and beat them. White seems to be the best color, just great commons and uncommons. There's like a common-uncommon value engine that is a little too easy to assemble. And Selesnya, green-white, I think is the best deck. Blue-red, I think, is the worst. You know, these are sort of the broad generalizations I can get out of playing the format so far. It's harder to rank everything, even though I did a little bit earlier, but I do think those two things are true. The Village cycle has overperformed, and I do like those lands a lot. And don't try to splash, for the most part. So, those are my 6 takeaways. Next week, we will have enough data where I can dive in and talk about cards I got wrong. You can bet Carrot Cake is going to be on that list since I gave it just a straight C in the set review, and it's performing more like a B-. So we're going to see that one. But there'll be some other cards, too, to talk about once we have all that data. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it, too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on my draft videos or my set review, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.